Pabst. I will introduce her and then I'll ask everyone to mute so that we can listen. Kirsten is the Missoula County Attorney. She's in her second term as the elected prosecutor for Missoula County and serves as Executive Vice President of the National District Attorneys Association Board of Directors. She graduated from School of Law and has been practicing for the past 26 years. In her role as county attorney, she supervises civil and criminal divisions, serving multiple law enforcement agencies and county departments. She's been named Criminal Justice Professional of the Year and recently received 2 National Achievement Awards for her work in the fields of organizational resilience and employee well-being. She also chairs the National Prosecutor Wellbeing Task Force. And recently, the U.S. Foreign Service Law Enforcement Unit bestowed its highest honor on Kirsten for her office's longstanding partnership with the agency and her commitment to protecting the people, property, and natural resources of the region. When she's not doing her job, outside the office, she enjoys making art, wrangling horses, spending time with her family, and she's on the board of directors for the Backcountry Horsemen of Missoula. So Kirsten's our speaker today, and if everyone will mute, take it away, Kirsten. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jim, and thank you all for having me. It is such an honor to be asked to talk about some of the work that our office is doing with this group. I've spoken with you before and have really enjoyed the great, robust conversations that we've had. So thank you for having me back. I have a couple of slides I'm going to try to share here. So let me know if it's working. Let's see the screen. I'm not great at this.
Okay, we can see the presentation. There you go.
All right, is it blue?
It's blue with a black band in the middle, yes.
Perfect. All right, we have liftoff. But this is really not lecture style. I just have these slides up to show you some numbers and some trends that are happening locally, but feel free to jump in with questions, and hopefully we'll have some time at the end for questions as well.
Kirsten, usually with this format, we find it easier to leave questions till the end.
Okay.
Okay?
That sounds great.
Good, thank you.
All right, so here's a little bit how our office is laid out. We have grown significantly since I took office 6 years ago. We've gone from 35 people to 45 people right currently. This is how it's mapped out, and I don't expect anyone to remember this, but just to give an idea of our organizational layout, I have 4 other members to my management team. 2 of those are attorneys, my chief civil deputy, Anna Conley, and Matt Jennings is my chief criminal deputy. They're both just amazingly brilliant leaders. They're smart attorneys, but they're also really kind people. And then on my operations side, I have Lucy Klaus and Crystal Zimmerman, and then a whole bunch of support staff, as you can see. In the civil division, our office is broken down generally into two divisions. Our civil division, people don't hear a lot about, and that's good. When you're hearing a lot about our civil side, it's generally not good news. But we're particularly busy. I have 3 civil litigators that work for the county. They defend lawsuits that are brought against others, or against the county by others. But they also advise all of the departments, the local boards, the fire departments, school boards. So they're quite busy. We're putting in this budget season for an additional civil litigator. We're hoping to get a 4th person there soon. Our dependent and neglected children unit has 4 attorneys that do nothing but represent the Department of Public Health and Human Services when children are removed from their parents due to abuse and neglect. And as you'll see a little bit later on in the presentation, most of that is related to drugs, specifically methamphetamine. And then we have another unit, which is our involuntary commitments and guardianship unit. We have one attorney that serves that role, and her job, she's real busy too. We probably could stand to have another attorney there. Basically filing petitions for commitment whenever someone is so mentally ill that they're unable to care for themselves or they pose a risk to themselves or others. The guardianships are less involved, but they're when someone needs to be appointed to help take care of someone else's finances or medical decisions and things like that. It basically gives them legal permission to do that, as you probably know. Look at some of the dependent and neglect numbers. So sadly, we file a lot of cases where children have to be put into foster care in Missoula County, but you'll see that kind of has dropped off the last couple of years, which is definitely a good sign. Part of that is that parents are doing a better job. Part of it is that we have more community services that are sort of enveloping families that are in crisis. And part of it is some legislative changes that require further efforts by the Department of Public Health before children can be removed. Our involuntary commitment numbers are down a little bit, not enough for my comfort level. You'll see here in 2018, we spiked at 300 petitions in 1 year. That's a lot. We think that's in large part to when the governor issued an order. Basically, it was a funding crisis, and case management services were cut like immediately and drastically about 6 months prior to that spike. And so what we've seen is that case managers are the safety net that basically holds this population in check and is able to keep them functioning as productive members of the community, or at least functioning members of the community. And when that case management program was wiped out, although it seems insignificant from the outside, it's the bottom sort of dropped out with our folks who are struggling with mental illness and were sort of on the fringe of being able to take care of themselves. Sorry, I have a message. I'm going to turn that off. Oops. Criminal division, you probably hear a little bit more about because those cases tend to make the news. We've got several units within our criminal division unit. We have our special victims unit, our general crimes unit, our juvenile unit, a drug prosecutor, and then justice court. In our special victims unit, we have 5 attorneys now. That's gone from, we've got 5 attorneys and 8 people that make up the unit. Historically, that's probably where we've seen the biggest shift, and that was in large part to before I took office, the Department of Justice investigation and all of that terrible news that resulted from a couple spectacular cases in the news. But essentially, we went from having 1 person that took care of those cases now to having 8, which is they're more time consuming. We don't have quite as many of them, but they definitely take more resources to handle them properly, and we're responding to that and doing that well. In fact, we've had lots of other jurisdictions come to us and study our model, and because it's working so well now. Our general crimes unit involves 13 attorneys, but one of those does juveniles, 1 handles drug prosecutions, and then 2 are in justice court, where they basically they handle DUIs and misdemeanor thefts and misdemeanor partner family member assault cases. Here's a graph of the breakdown. Now, these are stats from 2000 and you'll see 2012. through 2019. And really the only one that's important to look at here is this blue line. It's the best marker of what's happening locally. The orange is overall crimes, and you'll see some dips and ebbs and flows. And then the green is our misdemeanor level. That's kind of hard to measure because it really just depends on so many different factors, such as number of police officers writing tickets. And so if we lose some law enforcement officers, you'll see the misdemeanor numbers drop. It's not that the crime rate is changing that much. It's that our ability to respond to it changes faster than the actual crime rate. This felony rate is the blue one, and it's more stable, and it's a better snapshot of what's actually happening. And what you'll see is since 2013, sort of a gradual increase in violent crime, where in 2018, it started to taper off a little bit. Part of that was in response to our collaborative group we call Project Safe Neighborhoods, where the U.S. Attorney at the time, Kurt Almy, and I worked closely together with some of our other law enforcement partners to target the most dangerous, violent, and drug offenders. And what we saw was a lot more efficient use of resources, because when we got everybody in the room together, back when we could get in the room together, is that we found that a lot of the agencies were working on building cases against the same people. And so when we were able to bring those folks together and have them work together, it not only improved the efficiency of what we were doing, but it helped us get together and really target the most dangerous offenders and put our resources there instead of kind of spreading them a lot thinner. So we saw a gradual decrease in violent crime that was really encouraging, getting some lots of drugs and guns off the street. And then COVID kind of changed everything. So here's our crime numbers over the years of just the numbers. And like I said, this is basically the same information, just in a different format. But we are, in 2018, we filed 764 new felonies. That dipped down a little bit last year, and it dipped down a little bit more in 2020. Interestingly, though, the violent crime rate went up in 2020. The overall numbers went down a little bit. Most of those were property crimes, but we did file more violent crimes and more endangerment crimes. The endangerment crimes include things like felony DUIs, which is a fourth or subsequent offense, high-speed chases, shooting guns in residential neighborhoods, things that endanger the lives of other people. That's one of our really high priorities for that very reason, because they're such dangerous offenses. It's not that we don't care about property crimes and some of the other offenses. It's just that we have to prioritize the ones where our fellow citizens are being harmed. So in 2020, the new charges by type, 38% of the new felonies that we charged were violent crimes. And about half of those are crimes within a family, so interpersonal violence, child abuse, and about half of them are against either strangers or people that are unrelated. And then the endangerment crimes category makes up 16%. I put these two together because these are our highest priorities. But then property crimes made up 19%. Drug crimes made up 21%. That remains steady, and it has remained steady over the past several years. The reason for that is, although we're seeing an influx of influx of heroin and methamphetamine, my drug unit is operating at capacity and just really can't process any more cases. He's very efficient. He's very smart. We're trying to target the drug trafficking operations and some money laundering operations at the expense of prosecuting all of the possession of drug cases. Ideally, we'd like to get another person in that slot as well. so that we can actually, you'll see that number rise. And the reason that why the drugs are so important in what we do is because it really underlies every other one of these categories. There's very few crimes that aren't touched either by alcohol addiction or substance use disorder. And then 6%, kind of to close out this wheel here, are what I call administrative crimes, and those are victimless crimes that include things like failure to register, tampering with evidence, disorderly conduct, and things like that. Here's some current trends. The biggest one, as I mentioned earlier, is methamphetamine. Most of the methamphetamine that we get in Missoula is very high quality, and it's coming from the cartels in Mexico and eventually works its way up through Arizona, California, and then over from Washington before it kind of, we're sort of the last stop. Another one of the current trends, if you will, that I wanted to talk about was what the effects of COVID has had on local crime. As I said, at the beginning of 2020, our violent crime rate was down significantly since 2018, but as soon as the pandemic hit and some of the restrictions went into place, and for a multitude of other reasons, which I don't even pretend to understand, the crime rate started to spike, specifically family-related violence, and we saw a lot more domestic violence and pretty serious domestic violence and other violence against neighbors and homeless folks at the time. And that significantly increased all the way through until maybe September or October, and it started to taper off again a little bit, thankfully. Our law enforcement officers, though, are hopping. Another concern that our detention center started taking more serious offenders and not accepting lower risk offenders because of COVID. They were trying to keep COVID out of the detention facility and keep the inmates that were in there safe and the employees that work there safe. That was a decision made by our county commissioners in conjunction with the sheriff, and I think it was the right decision, but the result of it was that some of these medium level folks, we don't incarcerate lower level, low risk folks anyway, but some of the medium level folks were being released and committing lots and lots more drug driven crimes, lots of more property crimes, thefts, burglaries, things like that. And then they would be released again, or they would be charged with some kind of drug offense and be released. Some of them were released like 6 and 7 and 8 times after committing new offenses. And so it sort of shifted the profile of the detention facility. And it also made the job for our law enforcement partners a lot harder because folks on the street that were prone to committing crimes and being recidivists tended to sort of thumb their noses at law enforcement during this time period. Methamphetamine is a major driver. We've seen a huge increase in the number of overdose deaths from meth as well as from heroin, which is rapidly catching up to methamphetamine as a drug of choice and available drug. The problem with heroin is that the overdose rate is a lot higher than with meth, and that I don't know that it's higher. It's more lethal. And so if there's less margin of error. So when folks take too much heroin, oftentimes they don't survive. Fentanyl, we've heard about nationally. It's a really dangerous prescription drug. Most of the fentanyl that we're seeing on the black market is coming from China. They call it the gray death because it's even more dangerous than heroin. There's just no margin of error. Oftentimes, drug dealers and drug trafficking operations will cut heroin with fentanyl because it makes it that much more powerful and they get that much more money per dose. But it's really, really dangerous. Law enforcement officers have perished simply by coming in contact with it. We have not seen a lot of it in Montana, but we have seen a little bit, and we're starting to see it locally as well. I know the Highway Patrol I believe it was on I-90, ran into some not too long ago. We talked a little bit about the interpersonal violence and the family violence. The numbers of folks that are hurting each other is roughly stable, but what they're doing to each other is more extreme. And so we're seeing some trends of what would normally be misdemeanor partner family member assaults be elevated to strangulations and attempted homicides and assault with a weapon. So we're just seeing more serious family violence. Way too many high-speed chases. I do a quick little radio update every Friday on KGVO and talk about the weekly crime report, and I sort of chewed them out last weekend. Was talking about, if you're inclined at all to run from the cops when you're in trouble, don't do it, because what would normally have been a traffic offense, you've just turned into a felony offense that will stay on your record forever. It just is so dangerous, and we've had a lot of them lately. Property crimes, emerging local challenges, talked about that. Tech and cyber crimes. The computer criminals are generally at least one step ahead of law enforcement. We try to keep up with them and do lots of training, but as soon as you sort of figure out one of these computer scams, they're on to the next one. Electronic evidence. So you've probably heard a lot in the news about the body-worn cameras that law enforcement officers are wearing now, and everybody wants to see them as soon as the next morning in the next news cycle. And what people, I guess, don't understand is the volume of evidence that this creates. And the storage is a problem. The cost is a problem. It's good, and we encourage all the law enforcement to use audio and video recordings when they can, because it makes their job a lot easier when they treat people with respect and kindness. It's really nice to show that to a jury and say, sort of debunk this myth that the law enforcement behaves in ways that we see on the national news. We've got a really professional, great set of folks that work for the sheriff's department and for the city police department and the university police, and I don't think they get enough credit. But long story short is, what we used to have, I would just average, if I'd go into a trial on a murder case, I'd have to carry a box full of files and reports and witness statements and things. And sometimes it would be 2 boxes for a really big trial. Now the evidence is electronic, but it literally is tens of thousands of pages for every single case that we do. It's significant. That's expensive and it's cumbersome. And so we have people hire paralegals that are evidence techs, and they do nothing but handle all of the different types of electronic files and how to make them talk to each other. I'm still old school. I still like to bring a file into court. I found a box of old files, like 100 and 150-year-old files from prosecutions in Missoula over the years, and they're really fun to go through. I'm putting together sort of a crime photo museum of crime through the years. But there's a whole box of homicide files. There's probably 50 cases in one box. So the last one I pulled out the other day, it was about that thick. The police report was 2 pages long. It just blows my mind how much things are changing, how rapidly they're changing, and what it takes to try to keep up with the technology aspect of it. Elder abuse and exploitation is an initiative that we're continually working on. Responding to that, we see a lot of financial exploitation of elders, financial exploitation of small businesses locally, the financial implications of trial. The best number I could come up with about 10 years ago of the cost of a felony trial is about $250,000. And so we settle about 95% of our cases, and it's not just because of the financial aspect of it, but we settle, basically, we agree with on a plan that will help a person stop committing crimes and get off the criminal justice track altogether. So trials are very, very expensive. We avoid them when we can, but we are certainly not afraid to go to trial. And I've got a really, really a skilled set of attorneys that work for me right now. I'm just so proud of the work that they've been doing. Involuntary commitments we talked about. Criminal justice in the United States. So as you've probably heard, we have the highest incarceration rate per capita in the entire world. The recidivism rate upon release of offenders is staggering. And mass incarceration just isn't working, and it's very expensive. It negatively impacts people of color. And so basically what my position has been since I was elected 6 years ago is we're doing something wrong if we keep sending the same people to prison over and over and over. What are we doing? So we've taken a couple steps back and really taken a hard look at how we can do a better job as a criminal justice entity. And so the biggest thing for me, and this has sort of developed over the years, is we really need to shift to looking at risk and needs of people rather than punishing them. Punishment just doesn't work. It makes some people feel good, but it's very expensive and it doesn't work. So instead, let's look at the person as an individual. Look at the risk that they pose to the community. And if it's high, we respond accordingly. But if it's not, then let's look at their needs and try to meet those needs and take some of that punishment money and invest it in getting people off the criminal justice track. It's some work that I'm really proud of, and we've done some pretty cool things. This Goldilocks principle is this idea that if we take resources, so there's these folks, the low risk, low needs people that traditionally get put on the criminal justice track and move along just like everybody else over the years. It takes them a year to resolve the case. They're on probation for 3 years or 6 years or 10 years. And then at some point, 10 years later, they're out of the criminal justice system and they're no worse for the wear. They're the same person that went in. Now what we're doing is we're figuring out there's this group of people that don't need intervention. There's this, when they commit a crime, they're so ashamed of their behavior or have an awakening, or the fear of having to go to jail is so great that they're motivated by that. And so what we're doing is we're identifying that group early and getting them the limited resources that they need, but not spending hundreds of thousands of dollars in the long term on them when they don't need it. And then we're taking that money and diverting it to the higher risk offenders where we're going all out, identifying the people like Jonathan Birch, who killed 2 people, wounded a highway patrol trooper, and gravely wounded another individual. Those people, we will do everything in our power to send them to prison for the rest of their lives, because they can't be out in society and not hurt people. But if we can, we've seen this shift. And so if we can take those dollars and invest it in the higher risk folks, the data tells us that we actually see better outcomes in both groups. So it's really kind of a neat and new approach that we're super excited about. It requires an investment in people long before the criminal justice system ever kicks in. As you know, we're sort of a system of last resort. If someone's committing crimes and expecting the criminal justice system to make them better, every other system before that, including their family, the school system, the mental health system, has failed them. So it is, it's sort of a 3-pronged approach, which I'll talk a little bit about. So I'm committed to this 3-pronged approach, which I'll go over really quickly. It's, first of all, like I said, protect the community from high-risk offenders. Identify who they are and send them to prison. These are the Malcolms. They were foster parents who tortured and abused these children that were in their care. They are in prison. This is Jonathan Whitworth and Preston Rossback. They killed 2 people at a hotel downtown, execution style, simply because these people were in the wrong place at the wrong time. They are in prison. This is Jonathan Birch. He's on his way to prison. The one I mentioned earlier who shot Trooper Palmer and the other people. So the first prong is to protect us from the high-risk offenders, put our resources there. The second one is to engage in criminal justice reforms, and I'll talk a little bit about the specifics in a minute. And then invest in treatment and prevention to keep people from ever getting to the point where they need the criminal justice system to get them back on the right track anyway. We're part of a substance abuse grant. We're working with the United Way and with the police department in the high intensity trafficking drug task force. And we've got a grant to bring together members of the community to try to put together a comprehensive methamphetamine treatment and prevention plan. I'm so excited about this. I'm going to go visit one of the model centers in South Dakota in a couple of months. And the idea is hopefully we can replicate something like that here that serves as a prevention hub. It serves as a drug treatment facility, a reentry hub for folks that are either getting out of prison or are diverted from going to prison in the first place. So we're rethinking criminal justice. I have this program that I'm really proud of. It's called Calibrate, and it's Montana's first pre-trial or prosecution-led pretrial diversion program, where we're taking folks that are low risk, lower needs, and diverting them off the criminal justice track altogether through a program in my office. So I have a coordinator who meets with them, screens them for risk and needs, puts together a treatment plan, and if they successfully complete a treatment plan and do things like get their driver's license, sign up for Social Security if they need it, if that's appropriate, get a chemical dependency assessment, things like that. If they successfully complete the plan that's tailored to them, then we don't file charges. Or if charges are already filed, we agree to dismiss them. It has been so successful. In the 1 year, we saved 7,500 days of participants in the program, people that would otherwise be on pretrial supervision, in jail, on felony probation, or in prison. We have 7,500 days of that cost that we saved through our successful participants who completed the program. We're looking at bail reform. Not, like I said earlier, we don't put the lower risk folks in jail, unlike most other jurisdictions. That obviously comes with some cost because we can't predict everyone's behavior, but we can, to a certain extent, know who is going to commit new crimes in the community and who just needs treatment. And so we're getting those people in treatment rather than keeping them in jail pending trial. We're working together. I mean, it sounds really simple, but it's a huge shift in what was happening earlier. We've partnered with our law enforcement partners. We've partnered with the United States Attorney's Office, which has just been hugely helpful in coordinating our cases and sort of streamlining our resources. We've got our well-being program, which Jim talked a little bit about when he was introducing me. I'm really honored to chair this national task force that is so busy. It takes up a lot of my time on the weekends, but it's so worth it. And we're launching a prosecutor well-being program nationally because prosecutors are sort of not doing very well. The stress of the work and the vicarious trauma of working with such traumatic material day in, day out, year after year after year, it really takes a toll on a lot of people's mental health. And so we're teaching people how to be more resilient at the front end so that they don't sort of fall into that burnout category or leave, and then we have to pay to replace them. We have the state's first criminal mediation program, which is really taken off. That's exciting. Helps us settle some of our more difficult cases. without having to go to trial. We've got several specialized courts, a veterans court, adult drug court, a juvenile drug court, a mental health court, a family court. And what we see in specialized courts is people have to come to court more often, but the court, the judges that are willing to do these programs, and the staff are so much more involved with them in their lives that the success rate on those specialized courts is a lot higher than in traditional court. We have our Conviction Integrity Initiative, which basically means we have an open mind and a willingness to look at old cases and we're willing to review them, because the last thing that we want is to see an innocent person in prison. So we've worked with the Innocence Project a little bit, and we don't always agree with them, but we always agree to be in a dialogue with them. Data. It's really important to me that when we are spending precious taxpayer dollars, to do it in a way that's where we get the biggest bang for our buck. And so I'm constantly looking at reports, crime trends. I spend probably too much time trying to study where things are going and fill gaps so that we can be more efficient that way and do a better job. Jail population, we're looking at racial disparity in the jail. And then reentry, we're partnering with some of our other partners to engage in reentry to help folks that have been in custody adapt back to life in the community and hopefully help them be more productive. So that is the sum total. I know that was a lot of information that I went through really quickly. What questions do you have?
Let's see if we can see everybody here. And then, okay, Gary's got a question or a comment.
Kirsten, number one, thanks for meeting with us again today. In 1991, there was an incident at Adams Center when I was in management that went worldwide visibility. And so the next day, all sorts of levels of police, city, county, state, we met to develop a program to try to prevent what happened again. And I'm thinking of the Colorado shooting yesterday. Do you, as law enforcement folks, gather and plan, or not plan, but just discuss and say, what are we going to do if this comes to our community, or how we all as citizens want you to prevent it? So is there a discussion by city, county, state, federal when these incidents happen across our country?
Yes, there are, Gary. That's a really good question. Wasn't that we've had so many incidents like that. We have school shootings that average one a week. We don't always hear about them. We have a task force that works with the schools to talk about, one, how we can prevent it, and two, what we can do in the unfortunate event that something like that happens. We have a lot of active shooter trainings in government, what to do and how to stop them, how to save people quickly. Sadly, these are conversations that are not fun to have, but that have become necessary. Our Office of Emergency Management is just top dog. Nick Holloway is in charge, and he coordinates meetings every month with all of the partner entities to go through scenarios of all kinds of things that we don't want to think about happening: natural disasters, plane crashes, active shooter scenarios. And the efficiency of that group is really, truly amazing. I was on the President's Commission to study law enforcement and the response that hadn't been done since Lyndon Johnson was in office. I would think I was the only person, Kurt Almy and I were the only ones from Montana who got to participate, but my working group was victims' needs, and my particular assignment in that was to study a response to mass violence, which is interesting. And so I got to make recommendations on what communities need to do in order to adequately respond to victims in a scenario like that. And it involves a lot of prevention on the front end. And I got to work with Nick Holloway on that. It was just incredibly eye-opening, scary, but a sad reality of what we're dealing with.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Maritza?
Hi, thank you so much for talking to us. And I was just wondering, on the one side, when you showed violent crime and then drug-related crime, is there a lot of overlap there? Because that's something I've heard over the years, is that so much of our crimes would go down if we could magically erase drug addiction tomorrow.
Yes, there's a huge overlap. In fact, anecdotally, we're surprised if we see a violent crime that doesn't involve drugs. Not that drugs are the cause. I think we'd still have some violent crime, but much less.
Yeah, and I know Polson's had a lot of success with their drug court. Do we have a drug court similar like that in Missoula, or are there plans for one?
We have one.
Okay.
It's new though, and I've been working really hard. So right now our drug court only works with folks who have been convicted. And as you know, it takes a good 6 to 12 months before someone is generally convicted, between charge and conviction. And so there's that really critical time period when you're looking at it through an addiction lens that folks aren't able to get treatment. And so my push in looking at this is one thing where I feel like looking at numbers has really paid off, because the highest recidivism rate in 2020 was this group of folks pending trial who were battling addiction. And so I'm working with the judge in that particular court, and I just had a meeting with the chief public defender so that we could put up a united front to change the rules to allow this group of folks to get into drug treatment court prior to their conviction. So
maybe we can talk more about that.
Yeah, for sure.
Stories. Okay.
May?
Homelessness gets a lot of publicity. What does the data show that the intersection between homelessness and crime, and what are those real numbers?
I don't have those real numbers. I wish I did. I can talk anecdotally. Sadly, there's quite a bit of overlap there, and we are embracing the vision to. I'm using the wrong words, but the homelessness project, the goal to alleviate it in 10 years. We work closely with our partners at the city to do what we can do, as obviously we're a responsive agency. The criminal justice division is responsive rather than legally. We don't have the tools to be as proactive as some of the other entities, but because that so drastically affects our work, we do get engaged as much as we can on the front end with some of the prevention efforts.
Lee?
I want to compliment you on the number of programs and your approach to the challenges that you face. I read a number of stories in the general news from the Innocent Project point of view. It seems like so many of the people that are eventually released have in their history the fact that exculpatory evidence was not presented at the trial. How do you face the problem of handling exculpatory evidence?
So that's a really good comment, and I think you're right. And the Innocence Project has really sort of morphed in their mission from exonerating people through DNA to looking more closely at other issues like prosecutorial misconduct, law enforcement misconduct. And honestly, my cynical view of that is because they've run out of DNA cases. Basically, now we test everything, and so there are very few people, there, as far as I know, none in prison that DNA could potentially exonerate them. So they've really shifted to looking at witnesses' credibility and prosecutorial misconduct. We have a system in place that's great, what we do, and it's taken a lot of work, but we have a computer program that talks to the city and the county's law enforcement. So those reports, all of that information out there gets automatically uploaded to our system, and we automatically provide it to the defense. So we have an electronic library of evidence and files that all of our evidence is in, and they have access to all of it. So to avoid that very problem, the last thing you would want is to not have turned over something. But I can also tell you from personal experience that when I was talking about bringing those boxes of paper to court, it's really hard to keep track of that much information. And so oftentimes before trial, we would be I would invite the defense attorney to come to my office and go through my file with me, because I want to make sure that you have everything that I have. Because without fail, every major trial that I've ever done, there's been one piece of paper at least that didn't get shared, even though everyone wanted it to get shared. It just got stuck somewhere to the back of a file. So it's harder than it sounds, but we do everything we can to avoid that. Another tricky part of it, previously, before our computer systems talked to each other, law enforcement was required to give us everything that they had. And without disparaging them, sometimes if they didn't like something, we didn't always see it, so we couldn't turn it over. So we make a point. We've done a lot of training and educating with them and talk about some of the outcomes of these cases. And so I think we try really hard to avoid that. The last thing any of us would ever want would be to see an innocent person in prison.
Brenda?
One clarification. You said there's like one school shooting a week. Is that nationally?
Yeah, nationally. We haven't had, thank God, we have not had anything like that here.
Okay.
It just happens with way more frequency than most of us are comfortable with.
Yeah, for sure. The other thing I've always had a question about is, why is it that judges, some judges anyway, don't have to have any background in law, like law school, for instance? I was shocked by that when I first realized. I don't know how you can be a judge if you don't have a background in the law.
Well, most do. Most judges have to be attorneys. All of our district court judges have to be the municipal court, the federal court. The only exceptions to that would be the justices of the peace, and there's 2 of them. And the idea was way back when that they wanted it to be a people's court, sort of like Butte's police court, where people could just come and talk about what's going on and solve their differences and settle their disputes. Historically, that's where it came from. Whether or not I think that's still a good idea, I think I probably agree with you. It would be better. One of our justices of the peace is an attorney, and he worked as a city judge. And the other one is a retired probation officer, so she knows her law. She knows it very well. We're lucky, we're blessed to have such talented JPs, but that's not always the case and hasn't always been the case. We're just lucky right now.
Yeah, okay.
Tom?
Yes, if I'm not mistaken, about 6 years ago, the Krakauer book was having a great impact on our community. Are we beyond that, or do we still see influences or comments about that may impact the activities of your office?
Oh, yeah, I knew someone would bring that up. So, interestingly, I'm just going to really quickly, in a nutshell, kind of tell you what role that book played in what we do, which was nothing. We were investigated by the DOJ. I didn't work at the office at that time, but I did work with them because I had been a prosecutor for so long, and I had some concerns. Basically, there were a couple inflammatory cases that were in the news a lot that attracted Krakauer to come here and write the book. But our numbers were actually the same as everyone else's. We had our incidence of sexual assault was the same. Our prosecution rates were good. They were consistent statewide and nationally. They were better actually than most other places in Montana, average nationally, but they just needed somebody to look bad to get this conversation going, in my opinion. So before Krakauer came to town, I worked with the DOJ. We settled the lawsuit that my predecessor had filed against them. And as a result of that, we have the very best SVU program. We built that, and people started studying it before Krakauer ever came to town. It didn't change our outcomes because really we don't have any control over what juries are going to do with a set of facts. But what it did change was our process, making it much more victim friendly. And as a result of helping victims through the process and through the healing process, which traditionally wasn't a prosecutor's role, we're not therapists, we're trial lawyers, but we've really had to sort of soften that to do a better job. And so we're wearing a lot of hats, but now we have this great SVU program that basically is state of the art. So Krakauer's book, I know a lot about him. He's not particularly ethical. Nothing in that book was true to the extent that it was accurate. I mean, he may have picked a thread of truth here and there and woven them together to make a narrative that was very bad for Missoula and, in my opinion, very unfair. But I just don't give it too much thought because it doesn't have any credibility with me. One interesting side note to all of that Krakauer business is that, just to show you the sort of, as you probably guessed, there's a little bit of gender bias in my profession. It's very male oriented. There's very few female prosecutors. I was the first female to ever even run for county attorney in Missoula. But the trolls, and when I say trolls, I mean the people that lash out online on the internet at people, I still get death threats because of that book. My kids get threatened. It has really been a personal nightmare that none of it was really fair, but oh well, life's not fair. What do? Well, we look at where we can go from here. But the men that are featured in that book, none of them get trolled. I just thought that's a very interesting point, that even the trolls are biased towards women. They say the most horrible things to me. You ought to go commit suicide. Still, like last week I got another one. You ought to go commit suicide, or saying bad things about my family, my children. Anyway, long story short, there's been 3 books that have featured me, and one of them, that one, I'm made out to be the spawn of Satan. In the second one, they make me out to be this hero, this giving me credit that I don't necessarily deserve for doing the right thing in a difficult case and exonerating a person that was wrongfully convicted. I get way too much credit. And then in this third book that just came out, they just make me out to be sort of a hardworking, dedicated public servant who's trying to do the right thing. And so I just tell folks, you can decide which one.
Glenn? You've got to unmute yourself, Glenn.
I want to compliment Kirsten on her comments and communication skills, but I also wonder what the communication system is that allow us to hear her so much better than a lot of our speakers. And is it her system or ours, or what is the problem, do you think? Maybe it's my problem. I don't know, because I do.
Well, I'm really loud too.
I think she just speaks up and stays reasonably close to her microphone.
Okay. Well, thank you.
I don't know of any other secret. Brenda?
I just have one more question. what's your opinion on the current gun lack of law legislation and how that's going to impact crime and your job?
So let me start by saying that I am a gun owner who believes in reasonable gun control, and the factions are so divided on this issue that pisses everybody off. So I just believe strongly in reasonable gun control because I have seen the devastating effects of the deaths of people who were shot by those who should not have had guns. Mentally ill, repeat criminal offenders, violent offenders, wife abusers, the folks who should not have guns. And so the courthouse, for example, the courthouse is a place where people come on their darkest days to resolve conflicts. They're here because they're in jail or they're facing prison, or they're two neighbors who can't get along and have had to sue each other because they can't figure it out. And so why on earth would we say, come to this place where people are really vulnerable and bring your weapons when we know you're going to be angry and upset? And I've been working really hard towards improving the security system in the courthouse. There have been a lot of, like the school shootings, there have been a lot of courthouse shootings and attacks. And so in my opinion, it's a matter of time before it happens here. So I think we need a screener like they do at federal court and like at the airports. I think we need one entrance in and out, and people need to be aware. This is a place where we come to use our voices to settle disputes, not weapons, not fists. So that's just where I fall on it. It scares me.
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment. My husband's been a university professor for 31 years, and it scares me to death. I mean, I know some of the students that he has had that are mentally unstable, and you get alcohol, young kids. I told him, the day you turn 65, you are out of there, and that will be September 1st. Wow. But I am really scared that there's going to be an incident on campus.
I just wish that the folks making this, opening up these rules, understood that reasonable gun control does not mean anybody's ever going to come take your guns.
I know. It's all that.
I wouldn't let that happen. You know,
you can't have balance. God forbid we should have any balance.
Right? Or be middle of the road on anything.
Jim Harmon.
You're
muted, Jim.
Yeah, I clicked there. I guess my question comes under the heading of why in the world do you want to be in the office you hold, given the fact that the U.S. incarcerates more people per capita than any country in the world, and decade after decade, the war against drugs doesn't work?
Because I'm just pathetically, hopelessly optimistic. trying to make a difference locally. But I'm also trying to make a difference at the national level. And I've done some really cool things that I won't get into the weeds on with the National Board of District Attorneys. They are moving in the right direction too, and they're the umbrella organization that steers the prosecution ship in this country. And we are moving in the right direction. And I've seen movement in the last few years, more movement than in my last 25 years of doing this job. So that's why, because I love Missoula.
Right. Earl?
You mentioned a few moments ago that you're not a therapist. Who in your office or does it, or what is the process for determining which people are going to be in the criminal justice track, if you will, and which are going to be taken out of that line? It seems to me that I didn't see any psychiatrists or psychologists on your staff, so Who makes that
Well, we
determination?
actually do have a consultant who's a licensed clinical social worker and a trauma specialist on standby. But as far as screening people for the diversion program, we use a tool that was vetted. It's the Ohio, I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but you're right. It's not a therapist who screens folks, but it's a screening tool that we use to determine their risk of recidivism and their particular needs. And then if through the interview process it appears that there's a mental health need, then they're referred to a actual therapist. I wish we had one on staff.
Yeah. And just a follow-up. I don't watch television, but I am aware of a show that is that has that term in it, Special Victims Unit. Or I thought all victims were special, but who are special? Who are the people that are special victims? You have a group that.
Yeah, I didn't choose that name, and I don't particularly like special victims, but it is that, and we just haven't changed it. The people that qualify for their cases being prosecuted in that unit are victims of domestic violence, victims of sexual violence, and child abuse.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Don, do you have your hand up?
Yes, I did. So, Kirsten, some of you showed Birch and then this shooter in Colorado. They're all very young. And I'm assuming that, they're going to get life in prison. And I know Colorado just changed their law so they don't have capital punishment anymore. But and you talked about cost-benefit analysis and some of the compassionate things you're doing, which is great. But what on the other side, with a young person like this going to prison for possibly 60 years, the cost benefit of that versus a different form of punishment?
Well, some folks I was elected to decide the people that need to go to prison, and the folks that hurt people and continue to hurt people and present a high risk to harm them, it's worth the price that it costs to put them in prison. And I guess we're not always right, but we're usually right on that. The high risk offenders, I just am not going to back down on protecting the community from them, the people like Birch, because in my opinion that he will continue to behave that way and hurt people, kill people. So it's more of the middle ground folks and the low risk folks that we're trying to be more compassionate and trying to help them. The key is in figuring out who's who. And like I said to Earl, we don't always know that, but we do our best and use data and data informed tools to help us come to those conclusions.
Right. Yeah. I guess my question was more about, should Birch go to prison for life or should he have the death penalty?
Well, we technically don't have the death penalty in Montana. Sorry, I missed the gist of your question. Because of a Supreme Court ruling, a United States Supreme Court ruling on a case out of Florida that has the same statutory scheme as Montana does, where the jury decides guilt, the judge decides the death penalty. The United States Supreme Court has said that's unconstitutional. So until Montana rewrites the entire death penalty statutes, it is a punishment that won't happen here. So it's not really a tool that's in my toolbox. The next best thing, in my opinion, for someone like that is life in prison.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Lee?
I read an article in the New York Times Magazine recently about some studies that were done of crimes committed mostly by women, and a lot of them were defensive against abuse, and yet they still wind up being prosecuted because they did commit a crime, but they felt like their life was in danger if they didn't cooperate. with an abusive partner. Can you speak to that moral dilemma?
Well, it is a moral dilemma, but women who kill are just as guilty as men who kill. And so the finding of guilt is not affected by that. But I think judges tend to show some leniency if women who kill don't present a risk of killing again. I don't know what to tell you other than if the crime's been committed, we are going to prosecute it. They may end up, women who are just horribly abused and lash out may end up in a different type of corrections setting or get a different sentence, but they will still be prosecuted.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we're a little bit past our time, but as long as Kirsten's willing to stay, we've got. Good, Kirsten, thank you very much. That was very interesting.
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.